Greetings and welcome back to another edition of MGTOW Talks. I'm here with the now famous Adam Jensen to talk about a topic not often talked about, I think at least, and certainly in the wake of the conversation with the pale hominid and the alt-right in general. There is an interesting question that is at least invisibly posed and sort of put into the room, stationary as it were, and that is the question of tribalism, social cohesion. What are the benefits? What are the negatives? Versus other systems that will have benefits and negatives as well. I tend not to think my own view, and I'll give the floor to Adam in a bit. I tend not to think of these things in a sort of black and white setting. I'm very willing to acknowledge that there are benefits to social cohesion, probably based in largely in homogeneous population or what have you. But there are also benefits to, letting the best do what they can, regardless of where they come from, and disregarding things like homogeneity. So I don't see this as a black and white issue, and there are many aspects of this, including economic ones. But I'm going to give the floor to Adam with regards to tribalism. Why don't we hear your view on this?
Hi, thanks for having me on again, Stardust. So, this issue that we've been dealing with, tribalism, is an issue that we've seen essentially expounded by what can be generally summarized with the term, effectively, social justice. It's a term that dates back over 100 years. And the problem with it is that it's where most of the complaints that people from the alt-right are making, where people such as yourself are making, and where a lot of societal issues are coming from. And to look at this, you have to see that you see pride movements. And in response to the earlier perspectives talk with the pale hominid, he rightly did mention that several groups, several minority groups in the United States, and just groups outside, have their own pride movements. You see Asian pride, Black pride, Hispanic pride, etc. And I'm not going to say that there's inherently anything wrong with necessarily feeling pride, like in connection to your family and your friends. But the thing is, this is an inherently tribalistic attitude that goes back to our days on the plains 100,000 years ago and is more adaptive for situations in which we live in societies that are no larger than, say, 300 persons, and less adaptive in a society which cannot be put back into the bottle of a effectively globalized world. We now live in a system where, due to various things such as trade, plane tickets, and the internet especially, that we have to deal with the existence of quote-unquote people outside of our tribe, people outside of our in-group. And the reason why I think the pale hominid needs to be responded to is because his response to this issue of, well, there's all these groups that are expressing, that are having these pride movements that in some cases are leading to societal discohesion, for lack of a better word, is to do the exact same thing, except for, say, various subgroups of white people.
Now, I might interject. I'm going to occasionally play devil's advocate here.
Of
I've said a
course.
million times I'm not alt right, but so in saying that we live in a by per force a globalized society, and I agree with you. You're across the ocean. I'm in the old world and all of that. There are things that speak for almost maybe a human inability to do so. Are you familiar with Dunbar's number, for example?
Not off the top of my head, no.
So Dunbar's number is a theoretical cognitive limit to the number of people a single individual can maintain a sort of healthy, stable social relationship with.
Yes, it maxes out at 300 if I recall
Yeah,
correctly.
right. It depends on the species, obviously. Um, you know, because social species tend to have bigger brains, etc. It's mainly talks about primates, and there's some work with cetaceans there too. Um, but I don't just to clarify things. I don't think you're suggesting and say dealing with people that the number of people we care about or have close relationships with so much as being able to deal with without resorting to what often is some of the worst results you can get, violence. At the end of the day, we generally have a choice between conversation and violence in everything. There are different in betweens, of course, but that's generally how things go. Now, if I were in the alt right, I suppose I would argue that tribalism is just so endemic and so intrinsic to human nature, it can't be gotten rid of, at least in the vast majority of people. And regardless of whether it's good or bad, it necessarily has to be embraced because, I don't know, 90% or just the vast majority of people are tribal, and this needs to be taken into account and needs to be accommodated. So I'm curious, not necessarily my view, but I think, having studied the alt right a bit, that's how they would argue this. So I don't know what your response to that would be.
So I guess I could respond with another thing. First of all, that's a naturalistic fallacy. Simply because something is natural does not mean it's necessarily the way to go or good. Um, and
Well,
they may
I
not even
suppose
say it's good.
they're not even saying it's good per se. I mean, I think they would just argue it's so intrinsic and endemic. If you can't get rid of something, are you not left with any choice but to sort of just accommodate it?
I guess the fact that we're talking to each other right now is evidence to the contrary. That
Yeah, but we're freaks.
that may be so, but the thing is, um, our countries trade. Countries across the continent, across oceans, have been trading. In one of your earlier videos, you had mentioned that South Korea had been undergoing something of a societal shift towards a somewhat monoculture with the West.
Yeah,
If I
it's kind of
recall.
fusion, like cultural fusion. It seems more and more. Yeah.
Yes, and so what you're seeing is an exchange of ideas and an exchange of mores and what's not. And the thing is, it's the fact that we have this massive system of trade that I can quite easily, say, play a video game and talk to somebody from Russia or China or Ukraine, if they have internet access, um, and strike up a conversation, or just not even have to strike up a conversation, work towards a common goal, even if it is simply a video game goal. The fact of the matter is, these in massive, advanced, complicated systems of trade, commerce, and communication show that, yes, we do come from the plains. We do come from a tribalistic background, but somehow we've managed to break through that for
To
at
a degree.
least to a degree, and potentially only temporarily, but hopefully not temporarily.
Hmm. Now, once again, I think the alt-right people would argue that social cohesion does have benefits. People feel more comfortable. They feel a sense, I suppose, of primitive pride in arbitrarily belonging to whatever group they happen to belong to, this sort of thing. And this has sort of societal benefits. You watched Slay Pretty Lies video on where he talked about the study regarding diversity, which sort of created this turtling effect. What is your argument, say, against that?
Well, you would have to start off with defining things like society and like, well, when you say that, for instance, tribalism is good for societal cohesion, at what level? These people on the alt-right who I'm glad are bringing up several issues that need to be talked about, that we'll get into later. The problem is the lack of any sort of specific definition of society within these claims effectively makes it hard to even discuss it. It's like, well, do you mean social cohesion behind Polish people? Do you mean social cohesion at the town level, or even smaller?
Because I think they would argue, I see your point, they probably would argue in a sort of ethno-genetic racial profile. So,
well, that would go against the Dunbar number, because clearly even the smallest of countries has more than 300 people.
True, but then wouldn't they argue that it sort of artificially at least creates the illusion of connectedness between people of, I don't know, their big thing, of course, is being Northwestern European. So, a homeland for the Northwestern European, you might not be able to go past 300 individuals, but if you meet another pure-blooded Northwestern European, then that person will have some kind of artificial connection to you, especially if at the state level you have effectively sort of propaganda talking about how great it is to be a Northwestern European. I mean, substitute Northwestern European for anything else. I mean, just using it as an example.
But again, it's just the inherent problem of size and the number of people that you can actually have an emotional attachment to.
Right.
Like, you may be able to, say, travel throughout the Midwest, for example. You could travel from Michigan to Indiana to Illinois to various other states. And all these people would have very similar social backgrounds to you. And
white, Northwestern European, probably fanatically Christian. No.
Yeah, exactly. And still feel little to no connection to them. The thing is, you might even hate some of them. Some of the basics of that is just like, as a somewhat less serious example is, say, the rivalry between certain states, just at the college level, for example. Some people, when watching sports,
the college football,
there's serious conflict based off of a sport.
Well, and that's another form of tribalism. And you see, it's funny that there doesn't seem to be a clear-cut border, if you will, for tribalism, because you'll look at something like British football teams, like who are you going to get past, Manchester United, or who are you going to get behind Manchester United or Liverpool, and you'll see all kinds of people who are genetically very fairly distinct, uniting under the banner of supporting some football team because I don't know, it makes them feel good and they feel like they're represented through it or whatever. So there seem to me that all kinds of competing tribalisms, and the genetic one, to the extent you want to call it that, I mean, say white tribalism or whatever, Northwestern European tribe, it's just sort of one amongst others that isn't necessarily even stronger per se. I guess it would just depend on the context.
And and as an additional counterexample, I mean, even like say Northwestern European, ask the average French person what they think of the average British person. Ask the
Right.
average South Korean what they think of the average Japanese person.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, particularly the history of Korea and Japan is fraught with uh, all kinds of violence and conflict, and
Because
yeah,
of tribalism.
because they're people, and I think I see where we talked about this before, but essentially the state we got to here is more or less the result of the ability to exchange ideas and goods without too much hindrance. And if you have an art of, and we should talk about mercantilism in a bit, but if you have a blockade to that, that can create conflict. Now, we talked about this last night. I think it's important to reiterate it, but one of the most popular economic systems in the early modern era, say from the 16th to roughly the 19th-ish century, was mercantilism in Europe,
Hmm.
which, as you're familiar, involved a lot of protectionism,
It's
a
the
lot,
origin of a corporation or
yeah,
incorporation.
forbidding, colony X from trading with these people, subsidies on exports, limiting wages, not,
Guilds, the original
yeah,
unions.
yeah. So, and this, I don't, there's a lot of consensus from what I've read up on this subject traditionally that generally speaking, mercantilism led to open warfare.
Indeed,
And
indeed.
people, because, if you're fucking someone else over on the principle of protectionism and some sort of tribal value, they're going to want to get back at you.
Right, and just to quickly give a basic overview, or a quick synopsis of what mercantilism, for those who don't know much about the background, is one important aspect of it was this notion that there's only so much, for instance, there's only so much gold in the world, and each king or each leader of the nation wanted to keep as much gold within their country, um, while still trading somewhat in order to increase their gold stocks on net, as opposed to um, uh, just an exchange of all commodities. It was a focus. It was some odd focus on just a specific commodity, and they would the various medieval um, nations and and countries would do various things, such as incorporation, which originally meant uh, the king or queen or whatever type of leader you had would effectively grant you a monopoly in whatever industry you were in, because they believed that by doing so they could make sure that as much gold, um, that particular corporation now would bring gold from other countries to the country of the corporation in
And
exchange for the goods that the
I
corporation would
found a
make.
good quote that kind of sums it up, I think, from a book called I think published in 1549 even, a discourse of the common weal of the realm of England. Quote, "We must always take heed that we buy no more from strangers than we sell them, for so should we impoverish ourselves and enrich them."
Yeah, yeah, and you can see echoes of that today in the whole fear of unnecessary and unfounded fear of quote unquote trade deficits. It's the same thing. Um, and it's an inherently tribalistic notion. Um, and just by saying that, I mean, sure, what I've said before may be enough to somewhat dissuade someone from wanting that to be the case, but um, there are other aspects to that. When you have that sort of system, when you have a system that encourages a limitation on what can be traded, how things can be traded, and on accumulating gold for the crown, you get a twofold or a problem that is twofold. The first of which is just naturally, as economists have discovered, limiting trade is shooting yourself in the foot. Free trade is to economists what evolution is to biologists. It's one of the few things that economists across the political spectrum recognize as a good thing for societies due to mutual benefit. And by restricting that, you are impoverishing both the country you trade with, but if you care about your own, say, I don't know, country that you're proud to be a part of, you're impoverishing your own people, as it were. And the second phase to that is when the crown can accumulate gold, that's how it can afford to engage in warfare and the destruction of wealth. And the thing is, a lot of this warfare would occur between Northwestern Europeans.
Yeah, I mean,
these people who are supposed to be connected.
The height of mercantilism, well, you mentioned France and the United Kingdom, Spain, although I suppose the Spain are inferior. I've seen, at least in alt-right forums, Spanish aren't really white or whatever. Well, let's just call them honorary whites, whatever. But yeah, the great empires of the days of yore. I'm curious in that, though, if there's as much universal agreement on the question of tariffs, because it seems to me that tariffs are an important part of mercantilism and protectionism, economic protectionism. I know you wouldn't be for that. I probably wouldn't be for that, but that doesn't seem to have. That's kind of, there are debates, like say, punctuated equilibrium within evolution. Maybe it's a similar thing. I don't know, on the degree to which tariffs are harmful or helpful.
So, by free trade, what free trade means is the lifting of restrictions of trade between nations. And when an economist says that he or she supports free trade, what they mean is they support lifting the restrictions, such as the, say, number of goods that can be bought or sold. So, like, for instance, we can only import 50,000 cars from South Korea per year, and it also includes tariffs. Since the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which was so great for the Great Depression.
I'm familiar with. Tell the if they're not. Tell the audience a little bit more about the Smoot-Hawley tariff.
An initial response in the beginning of the Great Depression in the United States to lowering United States wealth was this idea that if we somehow drastically increased the taxes on imports from other nations, which effectively meant that a good which could be more efficiently produced in another nation than in the United States, let's say wheels for cars. Let's say that wheels could be more effectively produced in France than in the United States. That would mean that they could be more cheaply sold, and so you would have wheels in the United States marketplace from France that might cost half as much. And so the Smoot-Hawley tariff effectively followed the idea that we need to raise tariffs or taxes on these imports to the point where it would be economically unviable to purchase the imports over the locally produced good. And so if you have a tire made in the United States that costs twice as much than the French tire, the obvious solution to these individuals, Smoot and Hawley, maybe mispronouncing that, was, well, let's just make it so that through taxation, the actual price of these goods, when purchased in the United States, is at best the same. And effectively, it made it uneconomical to purchase goods from outside the United States. And as a result, the economy significantly worsened. There's a reason why it was called the Great Depression and not a recession. And there's a reason why it was called great, is because of how long-term and how high of an unemployment that we saw. And it did not help that you were raising the costs of the average individual. Yeah, of cheaper goods. For people who were already struggling with either unemployment or dwindling job options, or from the entrepreneurial side, the people who were making jobs, well, if it costs more to operate as a business, and nothing else has changed, your revenue has not changed, then you have to cut costs in order to stay in business. And quite often that results in firings. Mm. And so that was more of a quasi-scientific tribalistic notion. It was believed that, well, if we have this end goal of say preserving the American economy and not helping other economies, it just completely failed. It was evidence to this notion that when you try and say, quote, like, protect your own interests, protect your own country, you're actually harming it. And so that's not free trade. And so people will complain about things like NAFTA and TPP and TTIP, all these acronyms. But essentially these new trade deals. But when economists talk about free trade, this inherently anti-tribalistic notion where you dare trade with these people who would effectively be your enemies in any other scenario, it doesn't mean writing out a long list of regulations and implementing trade boards and laws that can regulate countries outside of your own. It simply means removing tariffs and limitations on how many goods can be imported.
In the context of the free exchange of goods, in as much as labor itself could be considered a good, labor mobility, I mean, this is a huge discussion within the EU. I'm not talking about people from the third world, but I mean, the classic example that keeps coming up are the Poles in the United Kingdom and other places. I recently read that there are over 10,000 Poles in Iceland doing construction work. Now, generally speaking, these people aren't on benefits. I mean, a few might be, but they're just tended to work pretty hard, and they're also willing to work for lower wages. Now, a lot of the uproar and anger in the Poles, specifically in the United Kingdom, is that, it's the sort of classic, the immigrants are taking our jobs. But in the context of free trade, in as much as labor itself is a good, if the Poles are in fact offering the same quality for cheaper price, i.e. they're willing to work for lower wages, as far as economies are concerned, that's not a bad thing, is it?
Yeah, I mean, there are research paper after research paper within the field of sociology and economics has just demonstrated over and over that it's not they dirk our gerbs, as South Park so eloquently put it. It was more along the lines of, these people are the equivalent of French tires. When a company or a country imports a good or imports an individual that is more efficient and less costly than, say, something from the homeland, you actually get an increase in overall wealth and employment in reality.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up, and I'm largely in agreement. It's just that having watched a few episodes of Stefan Molyneux, who you know, without actually calling himself as such, you could say is firmly in the alt-right camp by now.
Yeah.
Getting a bunch of people, including Jared Taylor and what's his name, another guy, recently a public policy researcher, and as much as Stefan Molyneux, at least in the past, had argued for, you know, free markets and whatever, these guys were saying, well, you know, for the sake of essentially the white race, maybe it's good to artificially, you know, offer extra perks to these people. So even though there are other people who are willing to work for less, I mean, it annoys the entrepreneurs and the people who run the business, but, you know, for the sake of the white race, you know, do it anyway. What I mean, from an economic perspective, what's your view of that? I mean, what's the harm there?
The harm in subsidizing individuals based off of race.
Yeah.
Again, it's tribalism and it's economically inefficient. I mean, the thing is, individuals by chance get skill sets that they are born with, and in other there are other skill sets that they can develop through hard work as well. But the thing is, if you're basing your subsidies just simply off of, oh, well, you don't have that much melanin, or you do have melanin, or you have some variation of some physical trait that has nothing to do with your work performance, it's no different than subsidizing just production within a country. Like, for instance, the corn subsidization that happens in the United States. What do we get as a result? I mean, you can always take a look at the fact that now we have corn syrup in pretty much every food product that's imaginable that has caused massive health effects. But from an economic perspective, it's just taking wealth from a more economically efficient group and distributing it to another less, and by definition that is socialistic. That's socialism.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting. Jared Taylor pointed out that I think he didn't openly say it, but he favors a kind of socialism. I mean, but what if, once again, playing devil's advocate, you say, well, you know, in order to preserve the Northwestern European phenotype, we'll take the hit. It's worth economic protectionism and welfare, special types of economic welfarism, employment welfarism, in order to you know, boost the birth rates and whatever, preserve the white race. I mean, I suppose this is just then it comes down to a question of values. Do you value economic productivity, or do you value a sort of ideological standpoint and you're willing to take a hit for it, right? I mean, it is just a sort of trade-off.
Well, it's a terrible trade-off. I mean, the thing is, white people have almost never been a majority when you just take a look at it from a global scale. Trying to get this notion of protecting the white race is just as tribalistic as possible. It literally is just a recoding of black nationalism or of any other pride group. It really is just the same thing.
But I'm curious. I mean, because we're similar. I mean, in some regard, I guess they would argue that you've been atomized. You're a major. I mean, you have a smattering of Eastern European, but you're majoritarily Northwestern European. I'm entirely, more or less entirely Eastern European. I mean, they would say you've just been sort of disconnected from something that you might have once had. How would you respond to that?
Well, the thing is, markets only can arise through the opposite of atomism or becoming atomized. The only way, like tribalism, is more atomistic. It's just that it's, or a better way of putting it is, it's more social, just by definition, to want to trade with more people, to want to have economic relations with more people, and because it allows for the movement of more people, the interaction of more people, the interaction of more ideas. When you cut off movements and trade, like movement of labor and things like that, you are decreasing sociality, and in effect, you will definitely take a hit, and that hit will eventually stir up further feelings of resentment from outside groups, such as, say, I hate to keep using black nationalists as an example, but that's just the thing. You further tensions between countries, and by doing this, you increase the tendency towards war. And we're in a unique period of time in our history where the last serious war that we've actually had, in terms of casualties, in terms of how much of the world was involved and how much of the economy was involved,
and
was
the death toll.
The death toll. Yeah, casualties, death toll. Yeah, was Vietnam. That was almost half a decade ago. Yes, we do now have civil wars, and we now have the occasional peacekeeping operation.
But not so much in the developed countries, though.
No, exactly, and that's the thing. It's because we trade. It's because we're fighting these tribalistic notions. We're
okay,
fighting.
Adam. So now we've kind of come to the elephant in the room, as it were. I suppose, once again, playing devil's advocate. Say, well, trade might be a contributing factor, but look at the difference in IQ averages between these countries, and I mean, the fact that these countries are far behind, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you have an interesting viewpoint on this. But by and large, there's no major conflict in places like South Korea and Japan and Taiwan, or in in Western Europe, or even Eastern Europe for that matter. Well, Ukraine, sort of, but it's more like a civil war than anything else. So you have a counterpoint to this, I imagine.
Yes. So I will readily concede that IQ can correlate very strongly in some cases with GDP, with just economic growth and economic systems that work well. But the thing is, it's a correlation. You can have it both. You can point to examples of both IQ coming first and then GDP coming afterwards, and vice versa. And the thing is, take a look at, say, China as an example. China, on average, in the 1950s, prior to their switch to it's state capitalism, but it's a form of a market. They had drastically higher IQs. Well, not drastically, but they had a higher average IQ than most Western Europeans and Americans. And yet they had drastically lower GDP. What was the difference? Well, their economic system. They were under the rule of Mao.
So you're suggesting that an economic system, if properly calibrated, can compensate for essentially IQ deficits or deficiencies and differences.
And can effectively nullify the benefits of a high IQ, if the high IQ is supposedly necessary. And the fact that you can have these systems in countries with high IQs.
Yeah, I suppose, and you can see this actually in Japan and Korea. I mean, they only really became world economic powers and leaders in research and development until after they became essentially available to the global market and as trade partners, and there was interaction.
And the thing is, like, so Japanese and the Japanese, incredibly high average IQ and lifespan, something else I'm interested in. And yet, if you actually look at their GDP, it has been stagnant.
Well, they practice protectionism to some degree, don't they?
Extremely so. They're incredibly xenophobic. They're tribalistic in the way that some of the alt-right would like. And
they've been in a slump since '91, pretty much.
Exactly. I mean, they've called it the lost decade, and now it should be called
the lost decades. The many decades of loss. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, since about 1995, their GDP has not increased. In fact, it's their GDP right now is the same, or is lower than it was in 1995. And that is in a country with a very high IQ.
Well, yeah, and I certainly, I'm largely in agreement with you there. There are always multiple factors at play, and especially if you have a system that's extremely xenophobic and an economic system of protectionism, then even now they're slowly doing it, particularly in the health sector. They're importing small numbers of skilled Philippine labor to do work that that there are just gaps for that's not there. South Korea has been opening up to that as well, just to varying degrees, just because they have low birth rates for reasons that everyone in the MGTOW community knows, just technology and advanced civilization, and there just really no other options. They might, I think, that type of society, as venerated as it is, as a model, long term might not be sustainable, if only economically.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, no matter what group you are, when you become wealthy, it turns into a system where you don't need to have like as you had mentioned in the video, you don't need to have kids tilling the field. It's not economically viable. Kids actually become expensive.
Yeah, kids are an economic consideration. I mean, it's as much as kids are a product of biological instinct, to the thinking person, they're cost as well. It's like, do I purchase the apartment or don't I? Should I buy this set of books or not? I mean, it's essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
Is it affordable?
Exactly. Yeah, and the thing is, there's an additional factor to be taken into account. One of the favorite targets of fear, things that these individuals on the alt-right are afraid of, people in the Islamic world. They're afraid of their birth rate being so high and them effectively dominating the world simply by just popping out babies. And yet, as I had talked to you personally earlier before, the Islamic birth rate has been dropping.
Yeah, divorce has been going up in places like Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this is, as I pointed out, is one of the great weaknesses of the alt-right, is they don't understand biological imperatives and how they interact with advanced civilization, something that MGTOW studied in depth. that there's a human universal. When you start getting technology and birth control and high levels of comfort and amenities and all these things, they combine together, and the need to pop out kids incessantly just ceases. You only need to go back to a century or two ago in Ireland, for example, and people were having families of 12. It wasn't any different than really sub-Saharan Africa in that regard.
Exactly.
It was a response to environmental conditions, which are slowly but surely across the globe ceasing to be. And I don't know if I mean, this is a discussion perhaps for another time or a separate section, but in as much as sub-Saharan Africa could ever achieve something comparable to Western Europe or Europe in general or Eastern Asia, eventually you would see birth rates drop there as well. But I think we've talked a lot about the economic stuff. Now, one thing
Yes.
we've observed is that talking about certain sets of data, it seems the alt-right in general has a kind of a stranglehold on it because they're the only ones willing to talk about it. Now, there's really two sides in the context of the United States, and you live in the United States and you're very familiar,
Yes.
to varying degrees with some of the violence that goes on there. So the fact of the matter is, there seemed to be a disproportionate number of arrests and shootings of young black males in the United States. If you look at the statistics, they also seem to commit a disproportionate number of the violent crimes. These two things would correlate with each other, in my view.
Yeah, they would.
The idea, I mean, police have procedure, they have protocol. The idea that the shootings and arrests occur willy-nilly seems absurd. It would mean that it just, I mean, as bad as the police can be, it's just fundamentally broken. But instead of acknowledging something like that, people on the left, largely the egalitarians and what have you, they just hand wave, or they turn to the Southern Poverty Law Center or whatever. I was just looking at the Southern Poverty Law Center a few hours ago. Apparently, Charles Murray, who is a very soft-spoken man, conservative author, he's listed there as well as a scientific racist. Anyway, and then you get people on the alt-right say, well, see, we're willing to talk about that. And I think you argued for a kind of multiplicity of voices working with the same sets of data at the very least. Maybe you could expand on that.
So the thing is, it's not that we have two viewpoints. It's we have one viewpoint, the alt-right, taking a look at the very limited data that we have on IQ across the world. We don't even have effective IQ data for almost 100 countries.
Well, yeah, and you remember how I showed you that article. It seemed really promising, interesting. Like, oh, wow, look, the Asian IQ on average is higher, but they have a much more narrow mean distribution. And we actually tried to find something to back it up, and we couldn't find anything.
Yeah.
It's just sort of led me to believe this is just sort of somewhat concocted, or it's just sort of an anecdotal guess or something.
Yeah, and later discovered that the author had made that graph himself based off of assumptions. The thing is, there's one viewpoint, and there's an additional non-viewpoint, and so with the extremely limited data that we have on IQ, we have the alt-right taking it and putting forth their arguments, and the non-viewpoint is simply hand-waving, is
IQ don't be reals.
Exactly. And I can understand this notion of trying to avoid discussion of IQ because, again, IQ tests themselves are only a single measure of general intelligence. That's what the field of neuroscience actually wants to measure. But even with that in mind, it's just it still doesn't justify the lack of an actual discussion. There should be an
A
actual
discussion of
there
human
should be an
biodiversity.
exactly. We should talk about, well, why is it that from the limited data that we have, that people in sub-Saharan Africa have an IQ roughly around 70 to 80 points? Why is it?
Why why is Gary, Indiana, largely, I think it's like 80% black, have up until recently the highest murder rate in the country and possibly North America?
Right, and the thing is, because there's this deafening silence from the left, and as a result from the scientific community, because the scientific community, as we previously discussed, is effectively its livelihood relies on its public relations.
The guy I mentioned earlier, Bruce Lynn, who worked on genetics and brains, I mean, I'm translating what he said. He basically said, "Well, I kind of want a science career, so I'm going to not do, I'm not going to do this research anymore." And this is the problem. Yeah, I mean, scientists can't talk about it. It's just left to essentially lay people of varying degrees of education to talk about it. But yeah, you're right. There's the non-side and there's one side.
Exactly. And so the thing is, that's not how you come to accurate conclusions. That's simply how you come to discord. That's how you just cause tribalism.
Yeah, because you see, what I've observed is, when the alt-right brings up data points about crime and IQ and other things, and in particular the difference between blacks and whites, the left and the egalitarians, they have no response. They say you're a racist. You're a scientific racist. Is why Charles Murray who's just a normal guy pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
It's put on the hit list of the Southern Poverty Law Center.
And
it makes them seem like, you see, we are right because they refuse to answer our questions. And this is kind of Jared Taylor's attitude. Has been a longstanding white nationalist. Nothing against the guys. You see, they're not willing to address the points I'm making. So I must be right, or there's no other interpretation whatsoever.
It galvanizes a viewpoint. And if we're going to have an actual discussion, and just another example that I know is a fan favorite of the alt-right is when Trump posted a picture on his Twitter. That was an image saying that black people commit 95% of the violent. It was either 95% of the violent crime against other black people or in the country. All the left-wing outlets and the general mainstream media came out to correct him by saying it's actually only 90%. And they thought that this was quite funny and a great victory over the mainstream media. And in effect, it was. Like, it was effectively Trump forcing people to talk about, well, hey, there is a very highly disproportionate amount of crime committed by this group. But the thing is, that doesn't answer the question of why. Why does this group act in this way? Why is there such terrible conditions? And the thing is, we're starting to get discussions involving things like, well, hey, maybe this whole thing called single motherhood is bad. And that's why you actually can see research in the field of psychology actually talking about, oh, well, when you don't have a father in the home, it drastically, or just two parents in the home, it drastically reduces the chances of economic and societal success. And
I would imagine a person outright,
society.
if I'm playing the devil's advocate, a person outright would argue, well, yeah, that's because black people are biologically more inclined towards single motherhood, or that, and they have lower IQs on average. The black Americans 85, and different hormonal profiles, and you combine all of that, and then you end up with the mess. I think that's what they would say.
They would, yeah, and the thing is, there's very little research within the field of neuroscience that I can point um, to actually be able to refute that. I can point out the fact that, for instance, prior to the drug war and prior to the Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, the implementation of more welfare reform, and as Coltan had pointed out, the increase in welfare spending after the pill, although CS had also made a good point of it not necessarily being the cause of welfare states. One of the favorite talking points of the alt-right is the nuclear family and how important it is. Well, if that's the case, then why is it that black people, prior to both the large expansion of the welfare state and the drug war, that we saw a nuclear family rate, percentage, a long-term marriage rate where black couples would stay together, being as high or higher than white people in the United States. They would stay married, and African Americans were seeing increases in their IQ as well, as a result, because of the fact that there were two parents in the household, and because they didn't have this two-tiered system that is also playing a role, and so that muddies the water. It's you can point to today and the days after the drug war and the Great Society expansion of the welfare state, where okay, now there is this drastic increase in crime, and we have this large proportion of black people in jail and single motherhood. But the thing is, that's only looking at now, after all these things have happened, and not prior, when black men were being thrown in jail for smoking pot, for using drugs. And so it's, at this point, it's comparing apples to oranges. You can't make an effective comparison simply because you can see that the drug war has disproportionately affected black people.
Okay, so that's one line of argument, but then we look at things a little side, education and academic achievement. Surely they would argue, I would imagine, controlling for environmental factors, whatever, even if you had an intact home, you're not going to get, say, East Asian outcomes for the average black person.
So the thing is, it's, again, one, there's a bell curve of intelligence, and these bell curves tend to be fairly close together. And when African Americans specifically do get the chance to stay in good college or good K through 12 systems and get the same level of education as the average white person, their average IQ is drastically closer. And again, this is where I run into the roadblock of there being limited research. I can only point to the old data of, for instance, the IQs of black children who were adopted by white families. And that research is over a decade old.
Right, but even if I recall, it still doesn't come. It's not actually at the white mean then, as far I recall, right? It's
It's not.
better, but it's not there.
It's not. And the thing is, when we have a paucity of research in this regard, I mean, the thing is, the default is effectively to listen to who's talking. And so if only the alt-right is talking about this, then it's no surprise that this idea, that you get things like increasing racial tension. Because you have on the one side the people on the alt-right taking this incredibly limited data set and drawing their own conclusions from it. And there being no effective response other than just, you're racist, no actual discussion, no actual research. And because a lot of these conclusions effectively boil down to these people are just not as good as us, it causes reactionary movements like Black Lives Matter
Now,
and racial tension.
I have to grill you a bit here. I mean, you're a scientist, and those who don't know, Adam Jensen is a geneticist who specializes in aging with a background in neuroscience. But you're trying to be objective here. I mean, the data we do have, for example, disproportionate number of arrests and shootings and what have you. But I think what you're arguing here, if I interpreted it correctly, is that there could be biological factors at play, and there could be environmental. It could be a combination of both.
We just don't
know.
have good research. Like, yeah. I want to be able to answer your question. I can understand if the audience is frustrated, because I'm frustrated.
So am I. I've been sort of working on this new video. I have to move soon, so that's kind of thrown a wrench in it. But I thought, oh wow, this is amazing. This perfectly correlates with my research on alleles that are correlated with greater sort of collectivism in East Asian populations. Here I have it right there. There's this beautiful little graph, and look at that mean distribution, and it's totally different. I guess the alt-right is correct, and then you can't find anything to back it up whatsoever. I find it frustrating as well. And the fact of the matter is, as you pointed out, ultimately this just leads to conflict. I mean, long term, if we still practice denialism, if the majority of society practiced denialism, and talking about these issues, unpleasant as they might be to some people at least, remains the province of the dark, dank corners of the internet.
Yes.
What do you view are the long-term prospects in light of that? I mean, where are we heading towards in light of that?
Well, the thing is, what I hope for is the alt-right to be effectively the new atheists of today, in the sense that they are a quote-unquote militant in the term, in the way that it was meant with atheists, in the sense that they were more abrasive than traditional atheists. They are more in your face about, hey, this is why religion is wrong, and here are the problems it causes, and things like that. And they were largely successful in addressing an issue that was an actual issue, which was creationism and intelligent design creeping into education curriculum. And they succeeded in doing so. And when that major end goal was achieved, they kind of just, they're still there. The new atheist, or atheism plus and whatever it is nowadays, is still around. It's just, it's no longer this massive force that gets talked about constantly. Like, I mean, you don't get, for instance, that, I forget the name of the guy, but this...
Kent Hovind?
Yeah. You neither see Kent Hovind, or say even Sam Harris on the news as much.
Well, yeah. I mean, Sam Harris is less about the argument for atheism, more about Islam's a bad thing. I mean, I think we should make clear you don't think Islam's a particularly nice thing.
No, I think it's a horrible idea, much like I think Christianity was a horrible idea 300 years ago. It's had more time to be dragged to uh, sanity, or a
Mm.
semblance of it, kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
And it also helps that good portions of, for instance, the Calvinist tradition. It was um, a subsection of Christianity, and even Jesuits and other early sects of Christianity quite quickly adopted um, classical liberal ideas of markets, in the sense that it kind of melded well with this notion of self-responsibility. And so, if anything, part of the reason why Christianity was, or the places that were Christian tended to be more economically successful, was because they were just it, the things that cause economic success were more compatible with their religion as they interpreted it. And so with Islam, it's newer. I mean, it's hundreds of years old, but it is newer. It has, just like Christianity, has violent texts. Um, and we have seen that it leads to, when radicalization occurs, it leads to horrible results. But where I see promise is, um, for instance, that decline in birth rates. Um, like in countries like Iran, in countries like Saudi Arabia, when these countries got wealthier, the birth rate dropped from about 3.7 per female to 2.5. And so even Islam is not immune to the civilizing effects of a wealthy and healthy society, a society of wealth and education and 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 better access to healthcare. But to get back to your question of where is this headed, um,
You gave the
the
positive scenario. So let's say
so
it's not just, let's say the alt-right is right and, the great race war is coming, or not all of them say that, but let's say tensions are just so high, be it in Europe and in the United States. I mean, what's the worst case scenario there, do you think?
well, just to quickly finish what I was actually going for with the whole new atheist analogy, I was going to say that the end goal for the alt-right is effectively an ending of political correctness, which, if they can do that, that would be great, and would actually be in and of itself an ending of the attention on the alt-right. They become the new
Is the
atheists.
ending of political? I mean,
Because, well, just like I said, the reason why they get traction is because political correctness is restricting the conversation to either.
yeah, and I
Um,
think they're not really aware of that. The fact of the matter is that if we could somehow dismantle political correctness, then they certainly would lose their unique flavor. That's for sure. I'm not sure they're even aware of that. They might actually be better off, lurking in the corners of political incorrectness, and with that mirage being maintained. I don't see political correctness really going away of the sort that we need to relating to the topics that we need to discuss, as we mentioned here. But
mhm.
let's say that doesn't happen. Let's say, the next decade or two,
Right.
it's just more political correctness. Everyone is hiding, afraid to say certain things. It's said in hush corners of the internet, maybe. And what do you think the end goal there is, or the end result rather?
If things like the alt-right continue, political correctness remains in control, then we'll get things like we'll get multiple, say, Trump presidencies. We'll get a furthering of these tribalistic fights. We'll see polarization, further polarization of the Black Lives Matter movement and Black nationalists. You'll see further polarization of the Islamic world and further polarization of the Western world. You'll see increasing. It'll be a regression. It'll be a regression back to mercantilism, effectively. It might not be as bad. Like we might not slide back 300 years worth, but we're going to see drastic increase in tariffs. We're going to see drastic increases in labor restrictions, like the mobility of labor, simply because simply because
not Northwestern European, get out of here.
well, yeah. The thing is, they'll people will point to the fact that you see, because Merkel is practicing welfare, state welfare, in the shape of effectively paying people to come to the country, as opposed to the true market mechanism of people going to places because
demand is there and they're capable of fulfilling that demand.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you'll see a restriction of that. You'll see tariffs increased again, and you'll see economic stagnation and just cost of living increases across the world, simply because of this regression from free trade. And it would not be surprising, because the state of nature the state of the world that we have today is just quite unnatural. We are tribalistic.
And therefore should be rejected, according to the alt-right.
Again, naturalistic fallacy. If they really like the idea of, pure societies, well, the purest society is 300 people, 300 hunter-gatherers. Your baby will be white, but it will starve to death. And so will you.
Well, and then, I don't want to talk too much about this because, both of you and I have some limited time here, but the long-term prospects of humanity are pretty dim. It's something that you and I have talked about a lot. We're both very interested in getting off the planet, potentially.
Yeah.
This is why I think they're just so myopic. It's just that if 1,000 years from now we're wiped out by some extinction event, or there's a solar flare, or any number of things could happen, mass volcanic explosions fundamentally change the atmosphere, eruptions rather. Okay, so you're going to have a nice blue-eyed blonde kid, but it's going to die and all your successive generations won't even be around.
All of these traditions that you hold dear
to your heart, it seems that if we cling too much to people are just tribal, and we just shouldn't even bother trying to overcome it. And there might be some pain. We started this conversation with the social cohesion versus tribalism. There obviously is pain that accompanies that. People
yes.
don't feel as comfortable. I admitted, being on the subway as the only white person, that didn't feel comfortable. You live in a city, intentionally in a neighborhood that, frankly speaking, doesn't have a lot of minorities. Yeah, that's all true. But if we don't try to work towards somehow overcoming this, as we're doing our tribalistic rituals, whether it's worshiping the football match or dancing to the rain gods, some mass extinction event's going to occur, and we're not going to be prepared. And to the extent that humanity is, they'll get their wish. Civilization will be wiped out. We'll regress back to where we were, and it'll just have to. If we're lucky, we'll just start all over, and over time, I guess, catch up. But it's not looking particularly bright in the future, and it's not. I just wish more people could get over this myopic vision. We need to acknowledge tribalism for what it is, for something that is intrinsic and endemic, but it's not a long-term solution for human beings economically or scientifically. And yeah, we absolutely need to totally deconstruct political correctness in order to get a multiplicity of voices out there on the subject, and above all, to allow scientists to do the fucking research to get
Exactly.
more data so we can look at it and come to firm, solid conclusions rather than, frankly speaking, sometimes half-assed conclusions based on conjecture, wishful thinking, and occasional bits of data. You know, it just we need. Yeah, I've mentioned political correctness before. I think this is the big obstacle, and the more we can talk about these things in the open without people being offended, the better off we are. And long term, I hope we don't end up in the sort of doomsday scenario you painted. Short term, but even long term, we're almost certainly faced with a doomsday scenario if humanity doesn't get its act together. So,
And I may have been a little hyperbolic, but it would be economic stagnation. And I mean, we already struggle to fund space programs, like with a growing economy. And I mean, is slowing that down, even like, is having a stagnant economy really worth it in order to have a slightly longer period of, say, having a majority, quote unquote, white population in limited regions of the world? I mean, just so that with the added cost that you have wasted more time, and in this cosmic realm of, hey, let's roll the dice every year because, we don't know when an asteroid's going to strike.
yeah, or fundamental changes in climate, or there's just so many different things that could occur.
It would just be rolling back the clock.
Yeah, I mean, and to be
economically.
fair, I get the impression a lot of these guys wouldn't mind. I should point out, these guys who are obsessed about having a white wife and a white children, just be successful and become rich. That's what women want. They just want status and money. I mean, it's not that hard. And if you do have status and money, you'll get white women, you get all kinds of women. And, it's not. I mean, if that's
We'll
really
get your Ivanka.
yeah. I mean, they'll probably divorce you. Look what happened to Elon Musk. But you'll get a white woman, you'll have white children, and you can be happy about your genetic legacy, I guess. I just don't. Once again, this thing talking about white identity is not going to get you the white genetic legacy that you want. It's frankly speaking, busting your ass and making lots of money that will.
And an almost guarantee that the white legacy will disappear if you truly value it.
Yeah, I mean
along with every other legacy, but
yeah. I mean, white legacies, brown legacies, purple legacies, cities, art, everything gone. But yeah, I think we just need to somehow, and this is another sort of leftover of evolution. We just didn't evolve to think in these long-term schemes of events and stuff. I mean, we barely evolved to think a few years ahead. So,
yeah.
I guess the first step, as I said repeatedly, I've said in so many videos, is we have to get rid of political correctness for all of these problems. It's just a huge obstacle. I mean, people are afraid of getting their channels taken down. It's just, yeah, and scientists can't do their work that they'd like to do. It's not worth, political correctness is not worth preserving people's hurt feelings, especially in the scenario you painted, potentially with the kind of economic depression and even potentially violence between different groups. Everyone fighting for a piece of a pie, an incredibly economically depressed atmosphere. It's
a shrinking pie, effectively.
Yeah, and then I just don't know how valuable this whole Northwestern white identity thing is if there's almost nothing left to enjoy. But hey, that's just my view. And I'm just a filthy Eastern European anyway. Anyway, so we've covered I think all the basis. You need to get to work soon. I need to continue my work. But there should be another talk later this week with Adam Jensen about a more philosophical topic, hopefully. One that many of my subscribers have expressed an interest in. I'm not going to spoil it here, but it has been talked about on occasion. Any final thoughts? Soon to be Dr. Jensen?
One can hope. Well, I guess the thing is I don't want to come off as overly hostile to the alt-right. I mean,
No, nor do
this
I.
whole time,
I'm just looking at all the data points and what's going on, you know.
Because the thing is, I mean, they have every right to be frustrated. I'm frustrated.
Let's talk about this. I mean, I was talking about this with Colton, like this whole white privilege thing and white guilt, and you know, it seems every ethnic group you could imagine is allowed to, you know, run around and talk about how great they feel about being that. But I mean, if some guy who you know, neither of us have these particular feelings, but if some guy wants to, you know, run the British flag or venerate King Alfred the Great, and he's part of the great Anglo-Saxon tradition, he's either labeled a loon or a supremacist or a Nazi or something like that.
Yeah. There's nothing inherently wrong with feeling some pride in your background. I mean, it's as long as you don't let that fool you into thinking or like overtake your sense of value, like where you get all of your value from. It's not like I'm saying that, oh, your cultures are worthless and dead and that we all need to just be economic robots or anything like that. That's not the case at all. If anything, the wealthier that we are, the more equipped we are to have means of storing and holding on to things of value that are valuable to tradition. Like, for instance, like we can better access, say, the Dead Sea Scrolls because we have better tools developed by research that was.
Them things gonna make us fly to Mars. I'm sure of that. But no, I see your point, but I guess it is a sort of an ongoing question why every other sort of identitarianism, you know, and I'm not neither of us are this kind of identitarian, but it seems to be acceptable, except admittedly a very poorly, I guess I'll call it Northwestern white identitarianism. Why that in particular is rejected as this horrible thing. I'd argue probably due to some events in Northwestern Europe during World War II, possibly.
Possibly, but I think it's more along the lines of people within Northwestern Europe themselves helped fracture. Or people within Northwestern Europe and the United States, the group in question, white people within these countries, proportions of themselves are just have this sense of white guilt.
But where does that come from? People have thought about, postulate all kinds of theories, but
I would say, I mean, that is a hard question to answer. I don't think I have a specific answer to that.
I've heard lots of ideas and theories, but there's nothing particularly concrete about it. But
I mean, there's not too much research into it.
No, well, for obvious reasons, and I think the alt-right in that regard, I've said before, it is important to point out the degrees of hypocrisy that, you know, every other ethnic group can, you know, dance around and sing about how great they are and revel in their traditions. Not that I have any interest in any sort of these traditions, but in as much as these other groups are doing it, you know, why can't this particular group do it as well, and why are they labeled, instantly sort of hostile or neo-Nazi-ish or whatever? It's it's a strange thing. I don't quite understand it. I mean, luckily for me, I don't feel the need to revel in any of this stuff, but certainly it they're correct in pointing it out. It's sort of forbidden fruit.
It is. It is hypocritical. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of glad that. At the very least, uh, it limits the potential. It limits the potential for, say, furthering tribalism into more groups of people, but at the same time, it just also causes tension that causes the creation of things like the alt-right, which have some justification in being created. As I said before, their frustration is justified. It's just that because of the lack of data and the lack of conversation, when you have no mediator on a discussion, it tends to go more to the extreme side.
Yeah, and the way people want it. I mean, they'll just. How many times I've heard, based off of anecdotal stuff, and maybe the anecdotes are supportive. Yeah, East Asians have, 5 point, half a standard deviation above white Europeans, but they're not as creative, and they'll, give sort of historical examples. But that's not actual data, and I think we need, solid evidence to show that, yeah, here's the evidence, but we don't really have that. Things like that. But I think once, if and when we can get rid of political correctness, in as much as people,
we can actually start researching.
Yeah, yeah, and in as much as people actually still care about, thumping their chest about being, black or white or Latino or whatever, they can do it without, worrying about, at least white people be able to do it without saying, oh, you're a racist. I mean, if that's you really feel the need to do that, then it is a hypocritical thing. But
it is.
I don't really know where that comes from, and I think it's a bit odd you and I talking about this because we're kind of freaks of nature. I mean, we're not particularly tribal. We don't really think much about our backgrounds
Right.
as consequential, and
Yeah.
We're not obsessed with reproduction. So,
Yeah.
on the other hand, who better to talk about this subject as someone as people removed from it, as it were, not directly enmeshed and involved.
We can have some degree of neutrality, but
Yeah, I'm
complete.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're going to have disagreements. It's just that you're right. The alt-right is correct in a few of their data points, and certainly it's a reaction to things that have been ongoing in Western society.
That have been unaddressed.
Yeah, that have been unaddressed, and the non-section, the non-argument, the hand waving, we's all the same camp.
Fans the flame. The hand waving fans the flame.
Yeah, they just don't get it. I think long term it's going to get worse or better if you're a member of the alt-right. I mean, I think you're going to get a lot more of this. Although the one thing, as a final note, that we're just not decide on is that to what extent the alt-right is more sort of an internet phenomenon, or alternatively, to what extent it's a reflection of the way people actually feel in real life and communities and whatever. I mean, it's hard to say.
I think one approximation or one idea that I'd like to throw out there, I guess, would be that it started off as a largely, if not, or as an entirely internet phenomenon. And it's just that, like for instance, the success of far right, quote unquote, right, as you've correctly pointed out before, they are simply
far left fascist parties. Yeah, sort of fascist-leaning parties. Yeah.
Nationalist
parties. Yeah.
Nationalist. It's just again, tribalism. It's just that there are people out there, like the success of Trump, for example, in the United States, is indicative not because certain websites have somehow managed to magic in a presidency or a nomination to a presidency. It's just that that person, Trump himself, as an example, is different. He's a kind of a breath of fresh air, even if that air is less than ideal and carries with it horrible ideas. It's honest and it's just off the cuff. It's not politically correct. It's something that we have not seen, and so you don't have to be a member of the alt-right to appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate some of the things that he says from time to time
same.
because he causes conversation. It's a good thing. It's just that the other things that he calls for, the protectionism, the tariffs, it doesn't bode well for our economy. I just rely on the fact that, well, at the very least, if he does become president, most of the bad things that he wants, he'd have to get through Congress. So
Yeah.
there'd be a filter at the very least.
Well, I think, we definitely covered most of the bases there. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. And, there should be another conversation, assuming the fates favor us, and check you out later. Thank you for joining me, soon to be Dr. Adam Jensen.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.